The kitchen looked blue at 2 in the morning. Marcus's laptop threw a cold light across the island. I was frozen over an email subject line. Transfer complete. $187,500. I read the name slow, like it might change. Natalie Quinn. His head rested on his folded arms at the counter. He was drunk, but he breathed steady. I took a screenshot and felt the tiny click in my pocket. He stirred, opened his eyes, and in a voice that had once soothed me, he said, "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving tonight." He closed his eyes and fell back asleep. My hands moved without me. I slid my phone under my shirt to keep the screenshot warm. Then I reached for the hotel receipt that had been lying on the counter. A small smear of lipstick marked the corner of the slip. As I bent to look, his phone lit up with a group text. A photo preview flashed across the screen without warning. It showed a hotel lobby, a room number, and a date that matched my receipts. My stomach dropped hard. I stared at Marcus as if I could wake him with my glare. Instead, he snored softly. The photo on his phone shifted, revealing faces I almost recognized and a name that did not belong. I tucked the receipts into my pocket and sat very still, listening to the refrigerator hum. I knew I had to choose one thing first: find out who else was in that group text. I spread the receipts like playing cards across the island. Date stamps lined up, credit card last 4 digits matched, and each note smelled faintly of perfume. I had kept odd withdrawals explained away as late dinners or business expenses. Now the paper trail made a picture I could not ignore. A tiny napkin bore Marcus's hurried handwriting. "Deposit cleared," it said. Another slip showed Aurora Consulting. I had seen that name before at a trustee sale and had assumed it was some small local firm. My hands trembled as I cross-checked dates on my phone and the receipts. One transfer went to a shell company with no real office and a P.O. box. The company name flashed on a foreclosure notice I had kept when we lost that rental 3 years ago. The logo looked the same. A cold thought crawled up my spine. Who else used that logo years ago? My throat felt dry. I thought of Natalie's name in the email and the photo on his phone. There was no comfort in the details. Each receipt seemed to whisper the same thing. This was planned, and it had been happening for a long time. I folded the hotel slip and slid it into my pocket next to the screenshot. My phone buzzed with a muted vibration. Someone had read the group chat. Someone typed and erased a message. I wanted to shout then, but instead I put the receipts back on the counter and breathed slow. The house smelled like cold coffee and betrayal. I did not scream. I started an inventory. I moved through our bedroom like an accountant. Jewelry boxes opened to show costume pieces and heirlooms. Life insurance documents were stacked in a neat folder. Old wills sat in their envelopes. I found the tax binders and the password list we kept in the junk drawer. I photographed everything I could legally access. Each image had a time and date on my phone. I found a folder with loan guarantees tucked behind an old mortgage bill. My name was penciled beside a line I did not remember signing. The handwriting looked like mine, but I could not be sure. My hands shook when I compared it to a grocery list I had written last week. Marcus's mother called, and I answered with a steady voice that felt borrowed. She told me stories about his 20s, times he had borrowed money and promised to pay it back. I listened and felt my skin crawl. She mentioned a name I had not thought of in years. I traced the pattern in my head like a map. A small signature in that folder made no sense. Whose handwriting was that? I took a picture of the page and sent it to myself with a note. Check this. Outside a car passed, and the tires sounded thin on the wet street. I realized then this was bigger than one late withdrawal. It was a net that had been woven around our lives. When I confronted Marcus, he smiled like an actor. He told me a story about working late. He said a coworker was going through a rough patch. He called the name Aurora Consulting, an old college friend. His voice was practiced and familiar. He reached for my hand and said love in the soft way he used to when we had silly fights. I let him lie because his life fit so easily into the life we had built. He promised to fix it. He said he would move the money back if I gave him a week. I watched the muscles in his jaw work as he spoke. He showed me a document with some numbers, and I pretended to understand. Later that night, I saw a text he thought I would not see. A casual message with an address matched one of the hotel receipts on the island. The message had 2 new names and the tiny smiling face of a woman I had once overheard him mention. I put the phone down and made him pasta. I laughed at his jokes and asked about his day in the tone I had used when times were simple. He leaned close and kissed my forehead. I felt a bruise form inside me, a heavy pulse of heat that said this would not be fixed by words. I let him go to meet this coworker, and I watched the front door close like a curtain. I hired a forensic accountant under a neat pretense. I called Andre Patel and said we needed help for taxes. Marcus thought it was routine. Andre arrived with a briefcase and a calm face. He asked me questions I had not thought to answer, and then he sat at my kitchen table and said one line, "This is not consulting. This is a pass-through." He showed me a chart with names that forked into shell companies and then into an out-of-state account. He pointed to a line, and my stomach dropped. A wire scheduled for tomorrow morning. I felt the world narrow to the thickness of a receipt. Andre said the account was fed by regular deposits. He circled the amount that had shown up on my phone. He said, quietly, "Someone planned this." I kept my voice even as the house hummed around us. I called the bank the way he told me and asked about holds and monitoring. The woman on the line asked me if I wanted to place a hold on unusual transfers. I said yes and gave the gentle lie. Just peace of mind. Andre sent me a text later that evening. It read, "If you want to stop the wire, we have to move fast." I nodded even though he could not see me. I folded my hands and tried to look like a woman with control. Inside, panic moved like water behind a thin dam. Everyone expected a fight. I gave Marcus dinner, his favorite pasta, and laughed at a joke about a silly client. He told me about the restaurant he would meet. He kissed me and left without a struggle. I watched the door close, then I called the bank and asked for a watch on large transfers. I lied again when they asked why. "Just peace of mind," I said, and the woman believed me. I prepared our kids' lunches for the next day with hands that trembled but did the work. Marcus sent a selfie from the restaurant. 2 names flashed under the photo that I had already seen on receipts. He thought I did not know. I had learned to hold still like bait, to let the other fish show himself. Silence, I had found, could be a weapon. I sat on the couch and made a list of small possible moves. Freeze, subpoena, call the lawyer. I texted Andre a coded note and closed the case files in a drawer. The bank confirmed, later that night, a scheduled transfer for midnight. The account was routed to an unfamiliar name. A cold sweat wrapped my back. I thought of the napkin with his handwriting, the lipstick. I thought of the photo on his phone. I stayed awake. I waited for the night to move the pieces. Andre traced an account out of state that showed both Marcus's name and Natalie's name. Small deposits fed the account. The big wire of $187,500 matched the timestamp of the email on my phone. Natalie had told friends she was broke, posting pictures of cheap brunches. The ledger said a different story. I called Laura Winslow, an attorney I had known for years, under the pretense of estate planning. I asked about subpoenas and what could be done quietly. She asked if I was prepared to make a scene in court. I said not yet, I needed more. Andre told me a wire was set to clear tomorrow. I felt that old heat of anger move into sharper focus. The subpoena was drafted overnight and served the next morning. Marcus's phone went straight to voicemail when Laura called to confirm. I watched him move around the house doing small chores like a man rehearsing innocence. I placed the subpoena with hands that did not shake. The paper felt heavy, like a small weight that might tip everything. Outside, the light changed, and the sky pulled gray across the tops of the trees. I thought about who would pick up for that out-of-state account if it was not Marcus. I thought of the faces in the group text. The house seemed suddenly too quiet for the secrets it held. Jules showed up with gossip and a paper bag. He had been at a bar where Marcus had joked too loud about fixing everything. He felt guilty. He handed me a receipt found in a trash can, Marcus's handwriting on the corner. Gift cleared. Inside the bag was a scrap with a name I did not expect, a director of one of those shell companies. My relief at finally having proof tasted like bile. The director's phone number led to a VoIP line tied to multiple shell companies. Everything I had suspected began to coil into place. Jules sat on the couch and watched me with the patient look of a friend who half wished he had not come. He told me about a brag over drinks. Marcus had said he had covered the hospital bills, then laughed that no one would ever know. That laugh echoed in my ears. I took photographs of the bar receipt and the scrap and added them to the folder I had started. Each paper I tucked into the file felt like a small victory, like clicking a shutter. I thanked Jules and walked him to the door. He hesitated on the stoop and said, "Be careful." I nodded and closed the door. The house swallowed the sound, and I felt very alone. I messaged a number listed as Natalie's friend, posing as a college buddy. She answered like someone used to small lies. I asked casual questions, and she told a story of a woman living in borrowed light. Fake job titles, a rented apartment she did not actually lease, unpaid hospital bills. On the ledger, I found a wire labeled medical that tied to a clinic in the next state. Natalie posted a sunlit brunch photo the next day, a smile wide and false. The ledger and the brunch could not both be true. I found myself angry in a new way. The money was not buying love or honesty. It was buying a story. I traced the clinical transfer and found endorsements that did not match the clinic's usual patients. I called the clinic and spoke to a woman who remembered a patient with that name, but not the amount listed. The more I pulled on threads, the more fabric came loose. I thought of Marcus's calm voice when he said he would fix things. That word was small and cruel. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a list. Subpoena, freeze, prove. The list felt like a ladder out of the hole. I wrote an ultimatum and did not send it. I left the paper on the kitchen table where he would see it like a prop. I packed a small suitcase as if I would leave, folding a sweater and a shirt. He found the note and it made him startle. I watched him negotiate in a way I had seen before. He would promise anything to keep control. In a slip between apology and excuse, he said, "I cleared the account 2 weeks ago." I wrote it down and dated it on my phone. The admission was small and accidental, but it was proof. The knock on the door was the next thing, a woman who claimed to be investigating investment fraud. She handed me a press badge for a business column and said, "Men like him leave a trail." Her name was Tessa Morgan. She said she had been following a pattern and wondered if I had seen anything. I kept my face calm and said, "No, nothing." She left a card and a look that felt like a key. I closed the door and sat on the floor, the packed bag at my feet. The house felt thin as paper, and the future felt like a room with all the lights off. Tessa returned with a quiet, steady energy. She told me she wrote for a business column and had been tracking small-time frauds. She said people like Marcus left a paper trail. She slid a card across the counter and said, "If you want, I can check public records for you." I took nothing and gave nothing. Her lead sent my fingers to a search engine. The headline that rose up made my stomach clench. 10 years ago, a small local paper had run a note about a foreclosure tied to an Aurora Consulting account. The piece was short, buried under newer stories about mayoral races and festivals, but the logo matched the one on my receipts. My heart thudded. Tessa told me the same name had been attached to quick cash transfers for fragile properties, lending to those who then defaulted. She said quietly, "It's a pattern." I closed the browser and felt the world tilt. The old story and my recent receipts fit against each other like puzzle pieces that had been left out in the rain. I thanked Tessa and asked her to stay quiet. She nodded and said, "We'll see what comes up." I looked at Marcus sleeping at the counter in the blue light and thought of all the small choices that had led us here. In a dusty file, I found a loan contract stamped and signed. Marcus's signature was clear. Mine was scrawled in pencil beside it. The handwriting was close enough to fool a casual eye, but not mine when I compared pen strokes. Someone had printed my name and penciled next to a line that named me guarantor. In the margin, someone had scrawled initials that looked like Natalie's. I felt the air go out of me. That night, Marcus was shredding mail in the laundry room. I photographed him through the doorway, the shredder swallowing paper like it ate whole promises. He glanced up and thought I did not know. I slid the photocopy of the guarantee into my folder and sent it to Laura. The shredded papers hinted at a bank statement with a strange deposit date. I wondered if he had erased evidence. He looked pale and small when he shuffled the bits. I felt no pity. I felt a resolve that sounded like a dry bell in the back of my head. I made copies, time-stamped each, and labeled them in Laura's requested order. I hid the originals in a locked drawer I had used for passports. Then I sat at the kitchen table and waited for the phone to ring. Laura filed an emergency motion. She asked the court for a temporary restraining order, asset freeze, and immediate financial disclosure. In court, I handed over the folder that had begun to taste like vengeance. Bank records, timestamps, hotel receipts, the forged guarantee. The ex filed for a protective order, a common tactic to muddy the waters. The judge scheduled a hearing in 3 days. I stood in the hall and watched Marcus walk by with a smallness I had not seen before. He looked like a man who had been shorn of costume. That night, an unknown voicemail landed in my inbox. The voice said, "I have something you need to see." My throat closed. I played it 3 times, and the only line that repeated was a clear, soft promise. "Call me if you want the full file." I felt the old fear braid with a new hope. If someone had more proof, the net could tighten. I made a list of questions for the witness. I wrote down the names in the file and double-checked the timestamps. Outside, the city breathed low and a single taxi idled at the corner, its light painting the kitchen window. Marcus went to work that morning, as if the day were routine. 2 hours later, he was called into HR. Someone had connected his client transfers to a small scandal, and the office air turned cold. He returned home pale and asked me to stand by him. I made tea and planned the next legal move. That evening, the unknown voicemail returned. The voice was careful and wanted to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation. The person said they had a photo of Marcus and Natalie leaving a hotel at 5 in the morning months ago. Laura asked me if we could protect a witness. She said anonymity could be handled with witness privileges and careful procedure. I felt the world tilt again toward exposure. I thought of the group text on his phone and the faces that had flashed. I thought of the receipts I had folded into my folder. I agreed to meet the witness under the condition of full anonymity and waited for the person to choose a place. The next day, the ex's lawyer fired off a subpoena for my phone records. The choice of what to reveal and what to keep secret pushed against my chest like winter wind. I tucked the subpoena into the folder and breathed slowly. A small envelope slipped under my door one morning. Sophia, our former nanny, had left it. Inside was a photograph of Marcus and Natalie emerging from a downtown hotel at dawn, their faces tired and the date scrawled on the back. Sophia had been afraid for her job and stayed quiet. She handed the picture to me and said she could not watch us be humiliated and lied to. I took the photo to Laura. It was the kind of evidence that can sway a judge because it matched dates on my receipts. The ex's lawyer retaliated with a subpoena for my phone and message logs. The subpoena forced a decision: reveal the whole trail or hold some moves for the courtroom. In the photo, Marcus did not look like the charming man I had married. He looked small. I felt something like grief pass through me. Laura said we had enough to press forward, but warned me the other side would try to spin a narrative. I sat with the photo on my lap and watched the sun make lines across the carpet. A neighbor waved and I waved back, smiling in a way that felt like masking. The house felt heavy, and I wondered how many other truths lay in quiet envelopes. The ex's camp leaked a doctored email to a gossip blog to paint me as vindictive. The public ridicule stung. I received messages filled with judgment from people who did not know the full story. Andre, however, had dug into account metadata and proved the real timing and the IP addresses. The proof swung sympathy back my way. My inbox filled with supportive strangers who sent kind notes or offered tips. Then my father called and told me he had kept a faded clipping from years ago because he thought it might matter one day. The clipping mentioned the same Aurora method and a small foreclosure Marcus had been tied to. My heart lodged like a stone. I sat with my father on the phone and asked small questions that made details fall out: names, places, a partner's initials. The old story joined the new like two halves making a shape. I printed the clipping and added it to the folder. The leak had been meant to disarm me. Instead, it gave me more fuel. The gossip felt suddenly thin against the weight of documented paper. I slept little and wrote more questions for our next meeting with the prosecutor. My father handed the faded clipping to Laura, and she prepared to move prior bad acts into evidence. In court, the ex's lawyer shouted for a recess, and I watched the judge run his finger along the margin notes. The courtroom hummed with the slow beat of realization. This was not a single mistake. It was a pattern. The judge's expression stayed unreadable while a pen hovered over the docket. I felt a small prickle of fear that the judge might not allow the old case to be introduced. Laura whispered that precedents favored disclosure when a pattern shows intent. We waited while the lawyers argued points about relevance. Marcus sat with his head down in the gallery. I stared at him and felt no desire to shout. The legal world moved in a dry, measured way. Documents, objections, rulings. At one point the judge looked up and his eyes met mine. He nodded once. The nod felt like a breath released. The old case slid into the record. I folded my hands and let out a slow exhale. The pattern was no longer just mine to hold. Natalie tried to cut a private deal. Under the pressure of discovery, she offered to return a small portion of the money if we signed a non-disclosure. Marcus pushed for it like a man who thought money could stitch wounds. He wrote a check on a napkin and slid it across the table as if the gesture could be proof of contrition. I recorded every term on my phone while he wrote. He handed me the napkin like a trophy. I gave it to Laura, unopened. Andre, meanwhile, found an endorsement anomaly in Natalie's account, a forged signature that matched one used by a known fraudster. Laura's jaw tightened when she saw the pattern. The attempt to settle quietly looked like a token, a bribe, a last move to buy silence. I pretended to consider it, but my thoughts were busy building an argument. We could accept a small return and keep quiet, or we could rip open the whole thing and see what spilled out. I chose the latter. I told Laura to move forward and let the pieces fall. In a moment of private thought, I poured a cup of tea and felt the steam fog the kitchen window. The world was changing shape. Andre found a forged endorsement and a routing through a corporate account tied to a small-time fraud ring. This discovery shifted our path from civil to criminal. Laura called assistant, DA Priya Shah. We walked into a small office and Priya's eyes scanned the documents with focus. She asked if I was willing to testify. Saying yes meant cross-examination and subpoenas and a public airing of our private life. I said yes because I wanted the truth to be known. Priya's team moved fast and asked if we could identify Marcus in a surveillance frame from the clinical account transfer. The frame showed a man leaving a clinic at the exact time a wire labeled medical had cleared. The face was one I had hoped never to see again. It matched Marcus. I felt my stomach drop. Priya warned me that criminal charges could mean jail time and restitution. She asked me to be ready and told me to think about the children and how cross-examination could be cruel. I nodded and felt heavy. This was no longer only about money. It was about justice. Pressure broke Marcus in new ways. One night at dinner, he accused me of destroying him. I listened and then handed him divorce papers I had prepared in secret. He stumbled back as if I had struck him. No one expected me to be the one to file. The papers were served and Natalie posted a tearful plea for forgiveness on social media. Then Priya called and asked me to come to the witness room tomorrow morning. Marcus answered a call in the night and spoke in a voice so small I almost did not recognize him. He whispered into the phone and then hung up and stared at me across the table like a man who had lost his map. I slept badly and dreamed of ledgers and receipts. In the morning I talked with DT. Brian Cole, who said they had enough to proceed if I testified. The weight of the decision pressed on me. Filing for divorce felt like a shield and a sword both. I had chosen a path that closed a door in one way and opened one in another. Detective Brian Cole asked for everything. Passwords, ledgers, every conversation I could remember. I sat through interviews and pretrial prep, reliving awkward moments and small lies I had locked away. In a hearing, the detective described the pattern of transfers and called Marcus a suspect. I watched Marcus's face as the detective spoke and felt the odd sensation of watching a stranger who had lived in my house. Outside the courthouse, a woman handed me a business card. She introduced herself as an investor who had read about my case and wanted to offer seed money for a recovery project. Her name was Margot Lynn. She said she had seed capital but wanted to meet after I had cleared the immediate legal storm. Priya called to confirm schedules and warned me cross-examination would be tough. I felt my throat tighten, but also a new steady resolve. If this was to be public, I wanted it to be useful for others too. I met with Margot in a small cafe, and she hinted at a plan to help women recover financially after betrayal. The idea felt like an ember, small and hot. Divorce court ruled the transfers were dissipation of marital assets. The judge ordered a split that favored me and froze accounts tied to the ex. Natalie was subpoenaed by the prosecutor. Marcus watched as his accounts drained under legal fees and lost client trust. I walked out with more than half of what had been ours and a feeling like a stone settling into place. My phone buzzed with an unexpected offer, a call from someone who wanted to help start a program that would help women recover after betrayal. The prosecutor called later with a plea offer that included restitution. The ex could accept and avoid a trial, which would fast-track recovery, but may mean less public accountability. I thought about what I wanted: money returned, lessons taught, and safety for my children. I told Priya I would consider the plea if restitution was good, and if public acknowledgement was part of the deal. That night I sat by the window and watched a single plane carve a line across the dark. For the first time, I felt the weight of what we had done. Everything began to unravel for Marcus. Colleagues pulled away. His promotion evaporated. Friends drifted like leaves. He wrote an op-ed painting me as vengeful, but the timeline and documents spoke louder. A mentor from my past reached out. She sent a ledger file showing another transfer pattern tied to Marcus's name a decade earlier. The mentor offered to help incubate a recovery fund for betrayed spouses. I felt the scales tip from fear toward possibility. I met with Margot again, and she proposed a small initial investment to pilot a program that helped women build credit, recover assets, and learn financial tools. The idea felt like sunlight warming a cold room. Marcus tried a last-ditch appeal in court to claw back funds, but his claims were dismissed. He called, asking to talk, and I agreed only if he would meet in public. I felt no triumph in his fall. I felt a deep, contained sorrow for what had been and what betrayed trust can do. The community around me shifted. People I had not spoken with in years reached out with offers of support. I felt steadier by the hour. With settlement funds, the frozen accounts, and Margot's check, I launched a small nonprofit called the Harbor Fund to help women recover financially after betrayal. We offered counseling, small grants, and basic financial training. I told parts of my story in a controlled interview, and the response was fierce and supportive. Women called and wrote and shared their own tales. My children's trust was secured. My credit intact. The final legal blow came when Marcus's last attempt to claw back funds was dismissed and the court ordered him to pay my legal fees. The message from the judge felt like a lock closing. I used part of the funds to seed an emergency grant program and kept the rest in a protected account for my children. The nonprofit grew slowly but steadily. I trained volunteers and found mentors. I felt a simmering pride that had nothing to do with money. It was about rebuilding on my terms. One afternoon, a quiet message arrived in my inbox. Marcus wanted to meet. I read it twice and set it aside. I thought about forgiveness and what it meant for me. The program needed focus, and so did I. Months later, I gave a talk at a community center about financial resilience. My voice did not shake. The room held faces lit by trust and pain. Marcus sat near the back, small and honest, for the first time since the saga began. After I finished, I greeted people and saw him waiting at the edge of the hall. He asked for forgiveness, and I listened. I slid a photocopy of the napkin check across a small table between us, the check he had thought would buy silence. He looked at it like a relic and asked if forgiveness meant a do-over. I told him forgiveness was not a do-over, but a closing of a chapter. The prosecutor pinged me that afternoon. The plea deal had closed, restitution finalized, and the case was now closed. I felt a long breath leave me. Behind me, the crowd applauded. Margot's email arrived with news. A new investor wanted to scale the program. I opened the message with an empty cup of coffee at my hand and smiled. Marcus left the center with his shoulders lower, carrying a quietness that felt like acceptance. I walked out into the fresh air and breathed in. I had stayed. I had moved. I had rebuilt a life grounded in truth and tools for others. My phone chimed with another small donation, and the Harbor Fund's little ledger filled with pennies that promised new beginnings.